Welcome in to the Just Basketball Show. I'm Chris Manning. That is Brendon, Kleen. If you haven't already, please subscribe or follow us on your podcast platform of choice. 5-star reviews only. Rate and subscribe and to us on YouTube. Follow us on TikTok. Follow us on Instagram and Twitter and your social media platforms of choice. Not Mastodon. Maybe we'll get a Mastodon if that ever is a thing I feel like I have to care about again. Brendon, a news-heavy episode for us today. The big story for us today, and the big thing is just going to be the Denver Nuggets, talking a little bit about the Minnesota Timberwolves, how weird things are going there. We got some fun stuff to dive into.
Some late season worries, some paranoia. It's that weird part of March, I feel like.
Yeah, it's like the Ides of March, but for NBA people. But we have some news to get through first. We're going to start with Lonzo Ball, who, as first reported, I believe, by Woj, is going to get a cartilage transplant in his troubling left knee. He obviously has not played the season due to that left knee. He's probably going to miss all of next season. Bobby Marks from ESPN, the great cap guy, has pointed out, he said there's no benefit now for Chicago to petition the league with regards to a possible Lonzo Ball career-ending injury, which is where I think we are at with this. They would still be responsible for $40+ million in salary owed, and even if they removed him from the cap, Chicago would not have cap space this summer. Brendon, let's start with the Lonzo side of this first, because there is a Bulls team-building side of this as well that I think we can talk about and get into. On a human level, it is so hard not to empathize with Lonzo Ball. His career could be over. His career has taken such a sharp turn away from what it was headed to. And it does feel like we're being robbed of something with what has happened with him.
Yeah, it does. I mean, is there anyone who doesn't? I think it would be hard not to feel bad for him, especially just considering that he's a player who, the thing that I was really thinking about when this all came down, especially this last bit of news where, Billy Donovan preseason said that they were going forward as if they weren't going to have Lonzo all year. And I think people obviously were sort of surprised to hear that, but also I think a little bit doubted him. It's like, okay, you're the coach. You have to treat the season that way, because if you act as if you're going to have him, you're just setting yourself up to be disappointed if it doesn't happen. But now that's the reality. And when that finally set in and when the Woj news came out, it's just crazy to me, I think, how we think about sure things, right? Like that was kind of the descriptor that kept circling around in my head, is like Lonzo Ball in that 2017 draft. The Suns were high up in that draft. It was thought to be fairly stacked. Josh Jackson was in that draft, and that's who the Suns took. There were a lot of players. It was up in the air. We knew the Lakers were probably going to take Lonzo because he's a UCLA guy and there's all that stuff. But Lonzo was like the guy where it's like his ceiling might not be high. He might just be sort of a team player. But you got Fultz, you got Tatum. Those are the sort of lottery picks, the like lottery ball picks to really hit their ceiling. Ball's the guy that's safe. And then now it just sort of proves how uncertain all of that is, how hard team building is, how hard franchise building is, to a degree why, it starts to illustrate why both LA and New Orleans were somewhat okay moving on from this player. And it's just a bummer that somebody can be everything you want in a basketball player and do everything that they need to improve their game. His shooting has gotten better, all that stuff. And yet, here we are where this nagging injury, this one body part is holding back what we all thought was just, the ideal sort of NBA player.
I really think you look at this and this is a guy that could contribute to a title-winning team, a really good playoff team. And it's like, even if he comes back in October of 2024 after 2.5 seasons away, what guarantee, what optimism should the Bulls, should any team have that Lonzo Ball is going to be remotely the same player when he comes back? And it's not like he's old, right? Like you mentioned, the guys you mentioned his draft class. That's like, these guys are still young. They're still like figuring out the beginning of their careers. Lonzo Ball is like, on a second contract, but he's 25 years old. Mm-hmm. He will not be 26 until next year. Okay. This is a guy who's like not even supposed to be in his prime, or just getting into his prime, and like this is where we are with him, and it's like what his career has just taken just like a path that is just like, and
well, I do think that's part of why you might have some optimism, right? Is he's not that old. There is something to be said for, rather than, I think that there's been times in the NBA where guys have hurt themselves like literally and metaphorically with trying to come back too soon, right? And like that can be its own problem. So I do think that there's something to be said for, if you think more treatment, more operation, and more time not pushing the knee is what will help, then I don't think this is the wrong decision. I think it could help him. I think that he is young enough where he has plenty of years of his like athletic prime, quote unquote, where he could return. And I think the last part is his game is not really predicated on hops or, burst or anything like that. He doesn't really have the ball in his hands a lot. He's really an off-ball connector, spacer type of player on offense, somebody who can get the ball moving in transition, but isn't really a point guard, quote unquote. And then, defensively, you do maybe wonder if he's going to be able to move and change direction and contain space and all that stuff, which is part of what made him special. But I do think that, maybe it's similar to like what we saw with Ricky Rubio, right? Where he's had some different injuries, but that the brain, the skill, the IQ, all that stuff is still going to be there. And as long as the jumper can stay where it's been, that's still a player that I think will be able to have a career. This isn't like Derrick Rose or something, right? You never know how it all goes.
Derrick Rose has been in the league like forever, even though he's like the ACL stuff really like robbed him of something.
Yeah, but I mean, I think he's been a guy where even the seasons he's had, it's just plagued with little injuries here and there, and somebody where it's like what he does just pushes his body so much that you don't really think he's ever even going to be able to play 70 games, let alone 80 or a playoff run or anything. So I think Lonzo could be more in that Ricky Rubio type of camp where as long as he's on the court, he can still be productive and he's not going to keep having injuries provided that this one can just heal. How is anyone supposed to say whether that's going to happen right now?
Yeah, it's like he has to go from being like, hey, like we don't know if he can walk up the stairs to like playing again, and that is like such like a big thing. The other part of this, I think, is just like what do the Bulls do? Where do the Bulls go from here as a franchise? They are in a really weird spot, in part because of this, in part because of all of the things happening. Like what happens with DeRozan, I think is really interesting. Levine has had a really, really good season. He's 28, but has had some knee issues. Like what do they do with him? Is there interest in him from other teams? Do they just keep him and rebuild around him? Like what does this team do? I think becomes like the next question. And if it's like Brendon, if I'm them, if I'm facing down this Lonzo thing, I'm facing down where DeMar DeRozan is at. I'm facing down just like even with the pick stuff. I am praying to God that the lottery gods bless me with a top 4 pick and I get to keep my pick in this draft and I get, a Scoot or a Miller or like a Thompson twin, or like if you like want to really thank your blessings, like you somehow get up to 1 and you get Wemby in just a moment of chaos from the basketball gods.
Yeah.
Or but I'm also just like I think it is at some point you probably got to just be like, we got to go studs up. We got to get down. We got to just like rip this down to the studs and like try again. I don't know what
does that mean though?
I think it might be trading everybody, and I think that starts with DeRozan. I think that's probably the guy that I think is the most immediate thing. But I could see, even if they don't do it in the summer, I could see in a year they're like, okay, maybe we got to do this Levine thing too. Like, what are we doing here?
I don't know if the Levine thing is necessarily what they would be. I don't know if the ball's in their court on that one. I'm not sure how desirable Zach LaVine, who also has his own history with knee injuries and is on a very big contract that just started and does not really affect the defensive end of the floor and hasn't really necessarily proven that. I don't think it's fair to say he can't coexist with other talented players because I think he's adapted to having DeRozan and Vucevic pretty well, but I don't think he's somebody who you bring in as he's going to make everybody on this team a lot better on offense. He's going to do his thing. He can play off of players. He's not like a franchise cornerstone offensive piece, and he is 28. So, you could look at that as a good or a bad. He's not that old, but he's also not that young. He's kind of in the middle. I'm not sure who's going to want Zach LaVine on that contract with the uncertainty around his injury either. So I don't know if you can trade him.
Yeah, I wonder, if the
who would want him? Who do you think would want him?
Well, the one that comes to mind is, and just as like they have to pivot and things get weird, is just maybe Philly. If Harden does in fact go to Houston, they just need to replace that scoring with something. I don't know how that works financially, but like that would be one where it's like you have to talk yourself into it, you know. And he's obviously not James Harden. He's not close, even this version of Harden. But like that, you'd have to. Someone like that is going to have to talk themselves into it. That's why there was Lakers buzz with LaVine. I think it's like they're just like we got to talk ourselves into something, or a star.
I think you would need a team where, because I think like the thing is we were joking about this quote that he said, "I've always been able to defend on the ball. I can stop anybody if I have the one-on-one situation." I mean I think most NBA players that's sort of true, but like
or at least they think
I don't
it's
think
true.
Yeah, I mean like everybody in the NBA has individual possessions over the course of a season where you watch them, put the clamps on somebody. Because it's like you're freak athletes and you do this for a living. You probably should be able to do that. But the point is that simplistic thing doesn't happen very often on defense. If you're not good at the other stuff, there's a limit. I think you just need a team where LaVine could be fit into what they already are and be sort of protected and insulated with what he's not great at. So some other playmakers on the team, some better defense around him that isn't, Nikola Vucevic, who's already going to be limited as a garbage man on the interior defensively. So like the Knicks or, teams like that where they have a little bit more of a physical identity. Miami, the Raptors, those teams that always come up when we talk about players like this, right?
Miami, like what would like how depressing of a trade would it be where it's like Duncan Robinson's salary and like whatever else you got to cobble together and like picks for Zach LaVine.
That's what they're looking at. I mean, it's going to be because he costs so much money. I really don't think they can do it. I really don't think right now, put another good season under his belt of health and production and efficiency and all that stuff, and then, one less year left on that contract. Maybe that helps. I think DeRozan is the more interesting one. So I had Miami, Portland, San Antonio, and Toronto. And the last two obviously would be reunions, right? But Miami and Portland, as far as competitive teams, I could see them fitting him in. They seem to like players like this, veterans who can create offense. But I don't know. Again, defensive questions for him. I'm not sure what great team would necessarily want him.
Portland, I think, would be fun just because I think like it gives him and it takes some of the pressure off Dame. The fit's a little weird because it's like Dame plus Simon plus DeRozan is like a really tricky defensive fit. The Portland one would actually make like a ton of sense. The Toronto one would make a ton of sense as a reunion just because you going back there. They have Siakam, they have Barnes, they have Pirtle. Like they have like these defensive, and they have OG at least for now. Like they have the defensive infrastructure to really like allow him to not have to be like put on an island in that way. And he would never be in situations where like he's just like got no one behind him, especially as he gets even a little bit older. I would not hate that one at all. The Miami one, him and Jimmy just feels like a little too overlapping to me. I don't totally. I think that's a little bit clunky fit. This like why, with the Spurs one, I think like if they wanted just like an adult in that franchise to kind of like lead the next generation, I don't think that's a bad idea. But the Toronto one would make like the most basketball sense, I think, in a lot of ways.
The weird thing about Chicago to me is, and as we're talking about these individual players. Did you realize they're fifth defensively in the NBA this season?
And like they're still awful, and like it's bizarre. And like if you told me the Bulls had the fifth best defense in March, and they were like just like in the play-in race, I'd be like, what happened?
Yeah,
like it's crazy. It doesn't They are one of the weirdest teams in the league to me, and then it's just like I just don't know what to make of them like at all. I really don't. It's just there's a lot of guys I like. I like Billy Donovan as a coach for the most part.
Yeah,
it's just like, what is going on here, and where is this going? This and the Wizards are like if I had two teams that I just don't really know exactly where you're going, it's Chicago and it's Washington for me right now.
I think Chicago has a little bit more direction as long as the two problems for them are they don't have their pick this year, obviously, which we talked about. They're in the 10 spot right now.
Got to get lucky.
Top 4
and
protected.
Keep your pick.
Yes. With all likelihood, we've never seen a team jump from like 14 to 4 in this flattened out. We've seen like 9 to 2 or whatever the John Morant thing was, but would have to be pretty incredible luck. That's bad. I think the other thing is Patrick Williams, Kobe White, these guys haven't really jumped. And so when you talk about like where I came down brainstorming thinking about this is you just trade DeRozan and Vucevic is a free agent, which we haven't necessarily said. And so I just think you probably let him walk. If you can get a sign and trade, fantastic. I don't know if that's really, why would anyone be trying to help you out there unless a good team over the cap wanted Vucevic? Maybe, I don't know. I don't really know who's going to want Vucevic. Just let him walk. It's fine. And then, try to trade DeRozan. Levine, like we talked about, might not have enough value to where the Bulls feel like it's worth it. So you just go into next season with Levine, maybe you try to get more of a traditional point guard in there. I don't know who that is. And just try to run out the season. Maybe you're still chasing the play-in a little bit, but you're not really seriously gunning for anything next year while you wait for Lonzo to get back. You wait for some of the salary stuff to even out. The problem with that plan, though, is if you don't have a rookie coming in and all of these other guys haven't really developed to a point where you're wanting to, like, fork over a whole season to shepherd them along because you don't feel that great about their ceiling anyway, then that's where I start to agree with you that they have more theoretical young talent than I feel like Washington does, but I don't really know if much of it is going to, pan out for them. So I don't know. You probably just hope somebody really wants DeRozan and you can get a pretty good package for him, maybe Caruso as well, and then you just ride it out. I don't know. It is a tough spot. It doesn't feel like next season is going to be fun in Chicago regardless.
No, tough times going there. All right, another big news story. Michael Jordan may sell his stake in the Charlotte Hornets to minority investor Clay Plotkin and Hawks minority investor Rick Schnall. This is from a financial perspective, Brendon. I think not super surprising considering Michael Jordan could cash out and make a ton of money. I think he bought the team for something in the $200 million. He's going to make a lot more than that were he to sell this team. Here, the one thing I do think about it that I hope works itself out in some ways, that I do think it is important and cool that Michael Jordan, perhaps the greatest player to ever play, unquestionably one of the top 2 to 3 most iconic players that has ever played, if not, I think probably the most iconic player considering the shoe side of it, is not going to be like involved in the league in a direct way if this goes through and he doesn't keep like a small stake or something like that. I think
seems like he will, but even that's right? Good. It's like, what does
even
that
then,
mean?
It's different, and it's like I love the idea that like MJ is involved with a team. Like it's why like LeBron is an owner, and like these other players perhaps in the future as owners. Like I think it's cool that like maybe in the future like Steph Curry owns like a small part of the Warriors or something, or Durant maybe buys in it with a team or something, or Giannis like that. Like LeBron like getting a team feels right to me. Being involved in the NBA and in basketball in a prominent way feels right to me. That's where my brain went first, but also Michael Jordan, like from a business perspective, is due to make a ton of money if he does this, and it does tell a story based on where the money's coming from, where the value is at, about where the league is at in terms of financially and what kind of owners they're going to have right now.
Yeah, I think we can get into that. I'm curious what you feel like though that, like, what is the league losing if Michael Jordan is not involved? Because I feel like we did see some high profile instances where Jordan sort of showed the importance that he does have. I think most notably during the George Floyd stuff, Jordan Brand made a big commitment. He was a big driving force in like the Social Justice Council that they formed coming together. Some of those things. He was a big prominent guy at the NBA 75 stuff at All-Star Weekend in 2022. I guess I just sort of wonder, like, what is the practical impact been of him having a team? Because I feel like, if anything, it's almost been a dent in his legacy. The team has been
100%.
Awful. So, like, I don't know if it's been a net positive that Michael Jordan was an owner. I think it was cool to say, and I think from the standpoint of race and the equity that the players are trying to push for with that, he is the only black owner in the league, and I'm sure that will come up. I'm sure LeBron will reference that as he pursues his own ownership down the line. But I don't know if it necessarily is a loss in that way, considering he'll still be around with Jordan Brand, and obviously he'll be invited, an open invitation to anything he wants to show up for.
Yeah, I mean, I think like maybe the most like thing you can tell is that like there's like Jordan related stuff with the Hornets. Like that's probably the most like tangible thing, and like this hasn't been a good team. I mean, the high is probably like the Kemba Walker era, right? Like It was. I mean, it hasn't ever been said publicly or maybe reported in full detail about why it happened, but it feels telling that Kenny Atkinson was like backed out of being head coach of the team to some degree. I mean, it can't reflect good or well on the Charlotte Hornets. Like, it just can't. If a coach says like even as bad as it looks for him to some degree, like that can't look well. I think the other part to look at it is the black ownership. Like, there is that this is now like a vastly majority black league where the owners are white. And that in itself is a complicated thing. And I'm sure that the players, particularly someone like LeBron James or Draymond Green, or these guys that have investment in and have like opinions about some of the stuff in the financial side of it and all of that, like I think like rightly will have some weird feelings about that. I mean, it's not just an NBA thing, that is an NFL thing as well. Like, there's not enough like black money, I think, in these leagues. I think that is a real thing with the NBA in particular. I'm curious to see just what this looks like, and I'm also just curious to see just like, okay, like what does LeBron have to say about this, especially as he looks to become an owner.
I think that leads us to the where the money is coming from, big picture, because I don't have a lot of optimism that the diversity among owners is going to change at all. And I think that it's cool to have the story of the LeBron generation in the NBA, which can include Wade, who's a minority owner in Utah already, or Chris Paul or Steph Curry, whatever, these guys Kevin Durant, that have been in the league during the biggest cash influx that it's ever seen and have the empowerment and power to affect change in the league and be partners, as Adam Silver has often called them, and all this stuff. LeBron's nowhere close to being wealthy enough to buy the majority stake in any NBA team. Like, I don't think people necessarily understand that, and I think if we look to history with Michael Jordan, that kind of exactly illustrates why. He bought barely a majority stake in the team back in the early 2000s or whatever it was when he bought the team for what you said, about $200-300 million. They cobbled together a group for him to get him to 50.1% or whatever, and then everybody else to fill in besides that. The Matt Ishbia and Justin Ishbia, who just bought into the Suns as the majority owners of this team and that I cover in Phoenix, like, they were at almost $2 billion for a majority stake, but they didn't even they had to finance that. So even these moguls in the real estate world, or in the mortgage world, didn't even have enough money. They're actually billionaires, like multi-billionaires, not LeBron getting to $1 billion and it being on Forbes, right? Like, they are genuinely like hugely wealthy people, and even they had to get financing from here, there, and everywhere and put together somewhat of a group themselves, and their dad bought some part of it, and like, it's not easy to afford these teams. And so I don't think we're going to see a lot of the Michael Jordan type of thing in the first place anymore. And I don't think that the NBA likes having these big groups, because that also makes it unwieldy, right? It seems like that's where they're headed with the Hornets again, which I have questions about. It seems like that's where they'll be headed with LeBron if he were to buy a team. It just makes you give more opportunities for people to screw up, right? Like, you get more unsavory people in the door, and it just makes it, you could be in for some problems.
The LeBron one, I think, is a little bit different, because it's going to be, I assume it's going to be Fenway Sports Group, the group he's been involved with. They own the Red Sox. They own Liverpool FC.
The Penguins, right?
They own the Penguins. Like, that is like a proven group that has like been very analytically friendly, that has been like, I know that I actually weirdly follow like some Red Sox people, and I know they're not happy with the Red Sox, but they've done like a really, really impressive job with Liverpool, I think, most notably. I can't really speak to the Penguin stuff of it. So I tend to think that like that is a little bit different than just like VCs coming in and stuff like that. I think that one is in its own class to me to some degree.
I wonder, though, because LeBron has been very clear, I want to be the owner of the Vegas team. I will be the owner of the Vegas team. I don't think he goes out here saying, I'm the owner of Liverpool. So what does it mean? What does that distinction end up meaning in practice? You know what I mean?
That's fair. That's fair.
I'm not saying you're wrong, because I agree that's the most obvious way for him to get in, but it's always a little cloudy with those funds of like, all of a sudden, one of those groups will invest and it's like, oh, such and such is like the representative. And you're like, I've never heard of that person's name. They're just one of the nameless, faceless people. LeBron's not nameless or faceless, but I don't know if he'll be content to be sort of like this face of something where the money's not his and he just sort of like tends to it and shows up courtside at the games in Vegas every few weeks. Like, I don't know what that'll be, but it begs the question because they did so much to bend over backwards for Jordan, but that was at a time when it wasn't as lucrative to buy or sell one of these teams, and they weren't being traded like assets, which is, I think, where we're headed a little bit. Like I pointed out the Milwaukee thing here in our notes. I don't know if people followed this, but in 2014, Mark Lazary bought the team at a valuation of $550 million. We don't know exactly what his stake was. They've always had a weird ownership group where it rotates who's the managing partner and whatever, and I'm sure people are a little bit aware of that part of it. But now he just sold his 25% stake, which has now been publicized what it is. It could have been different when he first bought in, but it was 25% now for a valuation that puts that 25% stake at about $875 million. So he bought in 9 years ago, and now his quarter stake of the team is more valuable than the whole team was 9 years ago. And so I just wonder what happens to kind of the culture of this stuff. What does it mean to care about a team as a fan, all this stuff, when they start to be traded out as if they're stock,
Look, yeah, and like we also just kind of know where the way money's coming in is going to be different. The NBA is allowing foreign investment funds to invest, and we'll see what that looks like. It is not a mistake that they played a preseason game with Giannis and Trae Young in Abu Dhabi, a place that has put a lot of money into the UFC, and like there's a lot of Arab investment in soccer, and the World Cup just went to Qatar because Qatar spent a lot of money and did some bribing. Allegedly did some bribing. Should say. They go to Paris. That's another place where you're trying to court money. Like they are clearly trying to bring in more money from diverse sources, and what that looks like in itself is interesting because like the NBA is not one of these European soccer things where like they can come in and just like pump money into it, and it's like you kind of like the return on investment is a little bit different. This is a little bit different. This is a different structure, and what does that look like for all of that? And like what team is going to be the first team to be like, hey, like we'll sell? What owner says I'll sell 10% of my team at a huge evaluation to get a cash influx in, and I get richer? And then does that go to the players? Does that go back into the team, or does that just these people profit? And then what does that look like? I think there's a lot of things that are going to change in this and be uncomfortable, and people are going to learn some things going forward. I mean, I don't think we're going to see like with the way the rules are set up, where I don't know if we're necessarily, Brendon, going to see like a Newcastle United takeover in that way, right? Like I don't know if we will. But do I think like you could see like a government that people maybe have some uncomfortable feelings about buying a stake in the NBA team in the next 10 years? Probably.
So what is the distinction you're making? Just that it won't be a majority ownership by a foreign investment fund, or that they won't?
It doesn't just feel like you're going to get like a full majority like takeover kind of thing in the same way, because the control is just going to it's different. And maybe I'm wrong, but like I don't know if the NBA is going to be like, yeah, like Saudi Arabia can functionally buy a team through like their public.
So you just think it's going to be these little like 5 to 10% chunks more likely? Yeah, I think that's. I mean, we've already seen that with a recent change that the league made that didn't get a lot of it.
A team is going to have like a Visit Abu Dhabi like jersey patch and like a 10% from like Abu Dhabi or something.
Yeah, and what I was going to say is like we've already seen that with venture capital firms and funds
and crypto.
Being able to
crypto.
Well, for jersey patches, yes, but I mean, like the Suns
and the arena in Miami that no longer is named.
The Suns had the Suns and Hawks, and I think a couple have had Dial Capital, this venture capital fund, buy into their team. The Suns actually had theirs buy in during COVID, and then when Robert Sarver had to sell the team, that fund actually already got rid of their stake, so they only owned a portion of the Suns for like 2 years, and they made a ton of money off of it. So you're already seeing those bits and pieces from national, like within the U.S. funds that are just treating this as a banking opportunity, and you're probably going to start to see that money come from places that people are not as optimistic and feel as savory about. But it's hard to know where it will go, but I do think it's fair to say change is coming, and it will be weird. I think that we're going to see it in the actual physical, stuff that we see and care about and watch and like about the league. It's not just going to be behind the scenes.
Yeah. Anything else you want to say about MJ or the money side of this?
No, I hope people go back to liking Michael Jordan. That would be nice, because I don't really understand why the Zoomers had to make him a joke. Like, he's very, very good player, seems like a very cool guy. I don't understand where the making him everything he does into a meme and hating on him all the time came from. Like, it's fun to do that, but I don't know. Let's cut that out, I think.
I mean, yeah. I will say, if anyone has never read it, not that this writer needs publicity, but Red Thompson's Michael Jordan feature is one of the greatest pieces of sports writing ever written. And if you want to understand him, I think read that story.
Mm-hmm.
I have that
also
in the
read his
Ray
Pat
Thompson
Riley
collection.
feature.
Yeah.
That
just
one
read
is,
Wright Thompson. Just read Wright Thompson.
It's a good rule of thumb.
It's a good rule of thumb. Seems I read his book about whiskey, and I'm not even a whiskey guy. That tells you something. I read Pappyland. All right, Brendon, let's move on to our big topic of the day. Late season worries, starring the Minnesota Timberwolves and the Denver Nuggets, two West teams. Let's start with the Wolves. This starts with two bits of injury news. Number one, Anthony Edwards. He injures his ankle over the weekend. He's in a walking boot at the game. He's now considered day-to-day, according to Shams.
Did you see that video? That was a nasty turn.
I was watching the game. This was the same night as Cavs Wizards, which was not an important basketball game and was quite literally a bizarre game that didn't learn anything from. So the person I was sitting with in press row we put the Purdue FDU game up on the TV in press row, and I put on the Wolves game on my laptop because I was like, all right, I'm going to watch Ant cook, and then he got hurt within 5 minutes of me turning on the game, so maybe it's my fault. Good that he avoided big injury. He has obviously had a really breakout season, made an all-star team. Was really weirdly he really moved out of that really weird phase to start his season. Do you remember how he was just kind of disinterested to start the year and wasn't playing that well, and then he really revved it up after a certain point? I don't know what switched there.
When when Kat said that he needed to stop eating Cheetos. Yeah,
probably that. Just took it personally. He's the LeBron meme, but it's of LeBron with the eyes rolling in the back of his head for competition, but it's Kat telling him to eat healthier. Just got really pissed off about that. There was a game in Cleveland where he was so disengaged that late in the game when it was a close game that the Wolves won, the Cavs put Isaac Okoro, their lead kind of defender in those spots, onto D'Angelo Russell and let Ant just stand in the corner. And I was what are we doing here? But he's ended up being awesome. That's the big win. The weird part of this is the Karl-Anthony Towns part of this. Mm-hmm. So the team put out a statement that he's continuing to progress in his rehabilitation program and has been participating in basketball activities. He is expected to return in the coming weeks, and further updates to his playing status will be provided when available. Brendon, there are 3 weeks left in the regular season.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What does this mean? What is going on here?
He has not played since November 28th. Just to give people some perspective. And I feel like I didn't go back and find the exact language when he first went out, but it was never supposed to be 4 months in the first place. So even this update being cloudy about where it will be from here, that even is extra. But it was never even supposed to be this long to begin with. And I don't know what to make of a lot of the aspects of this. I think we could just talk about Minnesota as a team a little bit to try to understand our way into this potentially. Because they lose the foul and rebounding game basically every night. They basically had no bench because of not only Towns' injury, but also Jordan McLaughlin, who I know, LOL, we're talking about Jordan McLaughlin as a major thing, but he was there. He's actually closed their Game 6 last year against the Grizzlies because D'Angelo Russell was playing so poorly. So this is an important part of their team. He was also out a lot of the year. And so they basically have, a makeshift rotation. They're playing Luka Garza and these two-way players a lot of the time. And
Luka Garza has absurd advanced stats. It's hilarious. They
don't have much, bizarre. Right? And so that sucks. That's why they're 500, despite Anthony Edwards being an Iron Man and really upping his game and kind of making the breakout that we all knew was coming, but it's cool to see. On the other hand, Chris, Towns, Ant, and Gobert lineups are plus 1.3 points per 100 possessions on the season. Not amazing, but good. Considering they only had like a month together. They weren't even really playing with a lot of chemistry, and everybody was making it out to be a hilarious joke, pathetic, a mockery of a franchise. And you look at the stats, not that awful, right? With those three on the court. So part of me feels like if they could just get Cat back by the playoffs and Ant back by the playoffs, I still might pick them to come out of the play-in because I think that they have a good top 7 is what I'll say, and I think they have more talent than a lot of the teams that they're going to be going up against in that range.
Sure. I think the other part of this, though, is that they have to reintroduce Cat, and there's a rhythm to that is that was clearly tricky at the beginning of the year. Him and Gobert was going to take a lot of time, obviously, and it didn't fully work. The way he had to play defense totally changed from what they asked him to do last year. That was an adjustment. That was really ugly. You have to just reintegrate him into everything on the fly, and that in itself, I don't think that's a lock to be smooth and easy. I would expect it's not going to be smooth and easy. There's no way that's going to be a simple. Towns is great, at shooting. I am not the biggest believer in Towns as a guy that I would trade a lot of picks for, or he has this big contract. I'm not the biggest Karl believer at this point based on what we've seen. That is also Ant's team. But it's you have to, if you're going to bring him back and integrate him and all of this stuff, I think it's just not going to be the cleanest thing in the world. And it's I trust, the Warriors are the top team in the play-in right now. We'll see if they, maybe leapfrog in. But if the Lakers get in there, if the Thunder get in there, if it's the Mavs, there's not, it's not to be a lock they get out of that. Even just if LeBron and AD and the way that the Lakers have played of late, I would kind of feel better about the Lakers right now. I trust the Thunder's cohesion and Shea more than I do anything going on with the Timberwolves right now. Luka and Kyrie, if they're both healthy.
I think that's a stretch to say that the Thunder with a bunch of rookies in every part of their rotation that you trust more.
But it's just because you
Wolves
have to
almost won their first round series last year.
I know, but it's the reintegration of Cat with Gobert and everything else going on. There's a whole rhythm that has to get refigured out with Cat.
I have a stat, so I'm checking myself in real time, and it'll support your point. So,
okay,
I looked up because I was Anthony Edwards on off. The Wolves are almost 6 points better per 100 possessions when he's out there, just him on or off. So then I'm okay. Towns and Gobert are a little more at neutral, just sort of zero, no difference when they're on or off. So I was wait a second. The stat that I pulled might have been weighed out by Anthony Edwards a lot more than anything else. So I went in and I did Cat on, Gobert on, Ant off. Would you like to hear how ugly this is?
Yeah, of course. Hit me.
Okay.
Hit me.
Minus 32.4 points per 100 possessions. Now, it's very rare that those two guys are on the court without Ant. It's only 59 total possessions. But yeah, I think it's fair to say that those guys integrating. But let me put this to you. What if, because they don't have that time, Chris Finch, the head coach, just looks at it and says, I'm pretty much going to stagger them always. And they might play the first 4 minutes of the half together, and then maybe they play the last 4 minutes of the game together, but that's it. I still don't think they can beat Oklahoma City. Wow.
I'm not saying I think they can't beat Oklahoma City. I'm just saying I don't know if it's they're the third or the fourth team I would feel good about in the play-in.
Okay. Well, they're definitely behind the Warriors, right? I mean, that's obvious. So then what? Yeah.
How do you feel? How do you feel about them vis-a-vis the Mavs?
Well, the Mavs are in 6 right now, but if they slipped, I would say I just don't know if they have. Especially an answer for Kyrie. I don't really know. Mike Conley is not exactly going to do that. Is Ant going to be able to do, is it really going to be the showcase 2-way 48-minute killer moment for Ant? He was awesome in the play-in last year. I just want to remind people. But I don't know if you can ask him to do that, especially coming off of an ankle. So
yeah. Where are you? But okay, just broadly, where are you at on Towns?
I think that it's hard because I think from a standpoint of looking at what happened last year, and even if we all were on the same page coming off of that playoff run, that the team is ants, right? Like whatever that means, he's going to be the best player on the team. I don't know about leadership and culture and blah, blah, blah. He's the best guy, right?
I think Mike Conley is probably like the culture, like that. They go get Mike Conley to be like, hey, like pass
Kyle
the ball.
Anderson. Right.
Yeah, like those are the leaders of that team right now. Like I don't know if the Mike Conley thing was like a massive needle mover, but I get why they were like, hey, we'd rather have Mike Conley than D'Lo as a point guard for this team.
Yeah, because they were also going to have to pay D'Lo and whatever, right? So I think we all came across that feeling the same way, and I think it was fair to say beyond that, if it's Ant's team, if we have some questions about Towns, to even maybe be like a number 2 in a traditional way, we need something. But as much as we can all clown Cat for the limitations, the way that he was fouling in the first round last year, not being able to grab rebounds without loose ball fouls, some of the weird stuff that was going on there, bad shot selection, whatever, the basketball IQ stuff that became almost a meme after that series. Mm-hmm. I think it did a big discredit to him to say, all right, our big move is going to be another center. Like, I know that the trade itself has been mocked a lot, but because Cat has missed the year, it feels like the kind of lingering memory is almost to pile on Cat more that he wasn't able to adapt. And it's like, I'm not sure many front offices would have looked at, okay, Cat has some limitations. We don't know about our future. How do we fix that? Let's get another player at his position. Like that. And so it just makes it hard for me to necessarily evaluate him separate and apart from all the rest of it. I honestly would have been fine with them coming into this season mostly the same, and just see if McDaniels, Vanderbilt, those guys could just have gotten better and helped you. And maybe you just roll it out. Ant gets a lot better. You see what happens with Russell. Maybe you still end up trading him for someone like Conley anyway. But I think that team would have made more sense, and so I would have been able to judge everybody a little bit better. I just don't know what to do with Cat, but he's making a ton of money, so you don't really have the luxury of saying, who knows? You got to make a decision.
Yeah, I think he should just run it back off of last year, and the slow-mo signing I think made a ton of sense. They just changed everything awesome. He needed to do. He's a connector that I think a lot of good teams would like. And in the summer, in a Cavs perspective, I was like, hey, it doesn't shoot it well enough, and is that exactly what you want? Is your kind of 3? And now I'm like, oh, you watch him play and you're kind of reminded, he overcomes the lack of being a plus shooter, which is everything else he does. The king of floaters. Zach Lowe wrote about that really well this week, that he's just the absolute king of floaters in the league. I think they put Karl in a tough spot by asking him to change everything they asked him to do defensively last year when he's already not a good defender.
Yeah. Yeah, I watched him early in the season, and he's chasing Cam Johnson around. What are we doing? Who thought that would ever work?
Apparently Tim Conley.
Well, it didn't.
Gave up way too many. I don't.
I think the problem is that you can't trade Gobert. It would be
you're stuck with Gobert.
It would be humiliating. It would, and his value is not anything, right? So
you can't recoup the value on Gobert by any stretch of the imagination. You have
to. If you're making any move, it has to be Towns. You're not trading Ant. No one really. I mean, Conley, whatever. There's not really much to do there. And McDaniels, they should want to keep, right? So it's
it's got to be.
You
Towns.
Don't have any moves left unless you just say whatever we had. This was somewhat of a lost season because Towns missed so much of it, and then they kind of just roll it back next year again with this. But I don't know if this front office is patient enough. They never have been. So I think at the very least, does the head coach get fired? Does whatever? I mean, I think they could come out of the play-in. I think we're maybe a little bit different on that, but it could happen, right? We both agree. They're not beating Denver. They're not beating even Sacramento. I don't think they're winning that series. I don't think they're beating Memphis, right? So it's they're not getting out of the first round, and I think that if after you make the Gobert trade, that's a pretty big disappointment. So they're going to have to look themselves in the mirror in some way, shape, or form, and I don't know what else there is to do besides trading Towns.
All right, so you have a little sidebar on the Wolves. I'm going to let you
let's go.
Run this out here.
I have 2 history lessons on both of our featured teams today. So one is the Jimmy Butler trade, which actually intersects with the Lonzo thing we started with a little bit as well, because it includes the Bulls and it obviously includes the 2017 draft, which Lonzo was drafted in, not to the Bulls, but he was in there because that was the night that the Bulls traded Butler to Minnesota. So originally, Chris, The Wolves got Butler and Justin Patton, who was actually eventually traded to the Sixers with Butler too, which was kind of funny. The Bulls got Chris Dunn, Zach LaVine, and Lauri Markkanen. Now, at face value, that's incredible now that we know what Lauri Markkanen has become, but obviously they never got that value for him. All that the Bulls ended up trading Markkanen for to Cleveland was a Portland first-rounder that is lottery protected that they may not even get much out of it when it's all said and done. I'm not sure when Portland is going to make the playoffs next, personally, so we'll see.
Maybe next year if they get DeMar DeRozan.
Yeah, there you go. It's coming full circle, guys. The show has structure. Minnesota later traded Butler to Philadelphia for Dario Saric, Robert Covington, and Jared Bayless. Then the Wolves traded Saric for Jarrett Culver and Covington for Jared Vanderbilt and Jaden McDaniels. All right, so if we look at it in sum, are you following me? The Wolves received Jarrett Culver, Jared Vanderbilt, and Jaden McDaniels. The Bulls received Zach LaVine and a lottery-protected Portland first-round pick. We kind of know where these teams have gone since, so maybe that colors how you feel about it, Chris. But I think this was a pretty nice win-win trade when it was all said and done, and I might lean Wolves, actually.
The Wolves should just be really kicking themselves. The Wolves messed up the draft is the thing with the Culver pick. That's where this goes wrong. Yeah. And like there's reporting that they wanted
value back then too. You almost can't really fault it. They just didn't develop him. But Culver was like almost a steal at 6. People thought he might go higher that season.
Yeah, and like there's reporting that that current Minnesota regime wanted Darius Garland, and I just think about Darius and Ant, and I'm just like, yeah, that would have been good. That would have been
well. And the good thing, like the other part of the Minnesota side is right. They also got a playoff appearance out of it, and they broke their curse when after KG left. They made the playoffs that one year with Butler and with Cat, and they were actually like a 50-plus win pace for a lot of that season. That was like the best season in recent franchise history. So you have to factor that in too, that the actual time Butler was there, it worked out.
Yeah.
So who won? Who do you think won?
Probably the Wolves, but like only because they just, they're in a better spot right now, I think. Like why. And like it's not, but like you look at the ultimate returns and it's like LaVine's probably the best is the best player of those 4, and they get a pick, but the Wolves like have Ant, and like which isn't like a result of this trade, but like the process like gets them Ant to some
kind
degree.
Of was because they ended up sucking bad enough to get him. I mean, I don't know how far you want to go down the rabbit hole of why things happened, but yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting one because it just has so many layers. You could even go one deeper and say, okay, well, Vanderbilt ended up becoming part of the Gobert trade, so then it's like I don't think they didn't get Gobert for Vanderbilt, but it helped.
Yeah.
And so then Gobert gets involved with it. But
yeah.
It's funny.
Just funny to think that this team might have just been better off with like Walker Kessler, with Walker Kessler.
Wow. The Gobert trade, I think we don't have to think too hard on. I think the Wolves were served a mighty L in that one.
They messed up. Jimmy and Ant on the same team. Like now, obviously, never really in the cards if you have Jimmy on your team, but like I would have liked those two in the same team. I feel like that would have been like a good buddy comedy.
I think they would have gotten along splendidly. I think. The Jimmy destination that really is the missed opportunity is Philly, but that's been well hashed out. We don't.
Joel Embiid talks about it and is like, I wish we still had Jimmy, and it's like, okay, yeah, fair, okay.
It made the wrong call on that one.
Yes, all right. Last team we're going to talk about today, the Denver Nuggets. Oh boy, Brendon. So, lost 4 or 5. Including and like barely beat the frickin' Pistons. Just lost to the Knicks.
Yeah.
I am of two minds about this. I am not full doomsday because I am not super surprised that the renewed concern over their defense is here. This is always going to be Denver's weakness. This is always going to be the thing that would be how they didn't win, right? Even when a couple weeks ago when we talked about them vis-a-vis the Suns, it's like, oh, like the Suns can like pick on their defense in this certain way and all of that stuff. So it's not surprising to me in this long 82-game season that this is popping up. But I'm also just looking at this recent run, and it's bad. Their depth feels really creaky at the moment. They probably just need to keep playing Christian Brown like a lot and just be like, hey, this guy's good. Let's just play him. And Jamal Murray does not look totally right. And they're not a title contender unless Murray's right. So Harrison Wind over at DNVR wrote this in his story the other day. I'm going to just read it. Shouts to DNVR. Shouts to Adam Adas. Quote, it was the Nuggets' 4th straight loss, and Murray's 4 straight underwhelming outing. He's averaging 16.3 points per game on 31.5% shooting from the floor and 25.7% from 3 in this current 4-game slide. During the losing streak, the Nuggets have reverted to the same dispiriting defense that they played to start the season. No surprise, but Denver's is the NBA's worst defense across these last 4 games. It's pretty bad, and I think if this gives you some pause about them going into the playoffs, I do not think that's unreasonable by any stretch of the imagination.
So those are 2 different things. What do you think is the bigger problem between the defense and
Murray?
Murray.
The defense that was already a problem, but I could see a world where they are good enough defensively and patch it together, and Murray is a bigger deal and it's just ascending and looks right and looks like the best version of himself, bubble Murray. And that's their path to winning a title. If Murray's not right, this team can't win a title.
Yeah, sure. I think that's undeniable. So I watched the Knicks. Well, I watched the second half of the Knicks game, and I watched all of the Raptors game. And those are the only ones I've seen. So I'm only speaking from that vantage point. But even then, kind of looking into the box scores a little bit, Brown, who I agree, Adam Mares and Zach Lowe talked about Brown on their show, talking about the Nuggets this week, and we'll try to provide some analysis better than what they said. I have another little history lesson that I think isn't getting enough attention, but they spoke to it, I think, pretty darn well. But since they talked, Brown was minus 13 against the Knicks and minus 12 in the plus-minus against the Raptors.
Sure.
The 2 games that I watched. And so I'm probably a little more sour on him than I should be. They're minus 11.3 per 100 possessions with him on the court over the course of the whole season. So the stats don't show that when he's on the court, it's a big boon. Obviously, we know it's asking a lot to have a rookie who hasn't gotten consistent run be your savior in March when you're trying to win a championship. And I think that they've really done themselves a disservice by waiting so long. I don't understand why it was so hard to see that this would become a need. I even watched this team, and some of it's just flat out size, being able to take up space defensively. You just see them get put into bad positions, like the Raptors, right? Mm-hmm. The Raptors weren't really doing the typical how you burn Denver's defense, blah, 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 you're going to, take the pull-up jumpers when Jokic drops. You're going to, move the ball and attack the basket when he shows on the pick and roll and make Aaron Gordon be the helper or MPJ be the helper, and they're not really equipped to do that. There's all these obvious highlight, posterization moments that we can point to with that stuff. That really wasn't what it was. The Raptors were just bigger at every position. Easy post up, easy ISO, dump it into Pirtle, and just, hammer the paint, run in transition, and they're going to finish over the top of you. Scotty Barnes and OG Anunoby had sick dunks in that game, and that was all it really was. It really wasn't, Fred VanVleet. He did make a lot of jumpers, but that to me didn't feel like the difference. So what did we think was going to be the end-all be-all? I even watched Jeff Green out there, and I'm like, they really look a lot better, and I'm not even sure they do, but he's just 6'9", so it just feels better to me, So I don't understand why they waited so long. I don't feel like you can count on Brown to come around in a month and suddenly be a real big difference maker. I'm not saying he won't, but I don't think counting on that is smart. And so I don't know what the bigger problem is. I think it has to be Murray just from a general, obvious standpoint of what you said. If he's not right, they're not there themselves. But I also am not super worried about it. He's just missing shots. When you watch him, it doesn't feel like he's actively withholding, athleticism or energy because he's hurt. I don't watch him feeling like, he's hobbling out there. It doesn't feel that way. So I guess that just feels fixable, whereas the defense and some of the size problems and some of the lineup stuff feels less fixable.
I just don't think he totally looks right physically.
Why?
I don't think
what are you seeing out there? Because I'm also watching them, and I don't feel like I see it.
You read the stuff locally, and you just read how he looks. I just don't think he looks. He's has the same bounce, the same energy level that he maybe had when he was playing his best this season. And just that's a little thing, and maybe it's wrong. It just doesn't feel like he is exactly playing the best. He looks exactly like he has the same bounce and energy, and it's the other knees bothering him. It just doesn't seem like he's 100% right physically to me.
Well, let me throw this out there because I just don't fully understand whole idea behind this concern with him. Like,
it's like because you read like you read Mike Singer at the Denver Post, and you read like Matt Moore's tweets, and you read the DNVR, and it's just like the one of the through lines is that Murray just doesn't seem exactly right physically. That's where this is coming from, honestly.
But can't they be wrong? I mean, just because I don't know. Like, I watched this Raptors game. He played 40 minutes. He was 5 of 18 from the field. I'm not saying
he wasn't good. He wasn't good. Yeah, he
was not good. And I totally get that. And obviously injuries play a part in missing shots. But he played 40 minutes. I counted one shot where he did not get any lift on his jumper. It was at the end of the third quarter, and Michael Malone checked him out right after that because he was obviously overexerted. 40 minutes for a guy who's dealing with a knee. He played 41 against the Clippers on February 26th. I'm more than willing to say that coming back from a long absence and playing heavy minutes and doing the level of stuff he has to do for them is affecting him. I'm not saying it's not affecting him, but what I'm saying is I don't necessarily watch him and feel like he's a big physical risk, like he's going to re-injure the knee or he's in a substantial amount of pain. It might just be discomfort, conditioning, the same stuff that happens to every player. We were talking about this with Klay Thompson last year, and then he comes back in the playoffs, looks incredible. I just don't feel like it's a long-term concern. I just feel like he's in a physical, mental, whatever, just a slump, and those happen. That's where I'm at with him.
It just feels like it's coming at the worst time at the end of a long season, and I don't know what I'm supposed to do with that, right? And if you're the Nuggets, what are you supposed to do with that? It's not just like one knee either. It's like it's both knees have been bothering him. You have right knee inflammation, you have left knee soreness. Like Mike Singer has a story up about this at the Denver Post, and that came out like I think early Sunday that people can go read, and it's good and worth looking at. But it's like, is this going to nag him throughout the playoffs when he's going to need to play 35, 40 minutes a game?
Probably.
Like, is that like, and like, what is that? And how much more does that put on Jokic, who's already doing so much for them, right? And like, is Michael Porter Jr. going to be able to step up in the way they need? And do they have someone else offensively who can step up the way they need?
Murray's so fascinating to me because I wonder how you feel about it. This is something I wanted to talk about when we had Adam on, but we talk a lot about what it would mean for Jokic to be the best player on a championship team just because he's won MVP and he's thought of as one of the best players in the NBA, which I would be curious where you sort of have him in your, back of your hand list, back of the napkin list on best players in the league, because I think that's kind of a fun conversation too. But Murray, I think the only comp I've ever been able to think of him for him as a number 2 on a title team in the NBA would be Kyrie Irving. But I don't think anyone thinks that Kyrie, that Murray is quite as good as the best version of Kyrie, right? I mean, he's close, but he's not. So that would be another unprecedented thing about this Nuggets team, is to have a player who isn't much of a playmaker, and he's not an elite playmaker. He's an elite scorer, an elite pull-up jump shooter, very versatile offensive player, does a lot of things very well. I think he has good size. He can post up, but doesn't do much in the way of locking people down defensively. He's not somebody you're going to throw on that. And he doesn't really create for his teammates at that highest level because he doesn't have to, right? Because Jokic does that. That's just a very different type of player to be the number 2 on the champion of a season than we've ever really seen before.
The Kyrie thing is the right comp because it's like, hey, you're a scoring guard who doesn't need to handle, who we can like theoretically like stagger lineups with, and doesn't need to handle the big playmaking burden. And like it's interesting that like they keep, and that was the version of Murray you saw in the bubble, right? Like that's the Murray we saw in the bubble. Like think about all the scoring and crazy nights he had in the bubble, and then it's just not been exactly the same sense. And it's just like he kind of has to be the guy because like I trust him to hold up defensively more than I do like Michael Porter Jr. As electric as a shooter as MPJ can be, he is just like an awful defender. He's awful at defense, and he's going to like get lost.
Though, right? I think they're both.
I know
fine
they're
as
different.
Team
I know
defenders. So it's really just about what are they going to do as help guys? What are they going to do when they do get ISO'd on?
Right.
I don't know. I don't know how different they really are. I don't think Murray's stopping many people either, to be honest with you.
I don't think he's stopping people, but I trust him to like recover a little bit better and like be a little more aware than I would MPJ. And MPJ's on the wing. And being on the wing, depending on who you play, like if you get the Clippers, you get the Suns, You can't tell me the Suns aren't gonna like do a bunch of. They're gonna organize stuff so Devin Booker and Kevin Durant are running screen and
They
rolls.
already
or
did that in
ISOs
that
at him.
series you referenced a minute ago. They absolutely
Exactly.
tore Michael Porter Jr. apart, but he's a lot better than he was as a team defender then. It is
Sure.
just ISO. Let me put it this way to you. I know you were making a different point, but I think it's interesting.
No, it's okay.
Who are they going to ISO? If Kawhi in the last 5 minutes of a game ends up playing the Denver Nuggets and he is just trying to get a mismatch that he can attack, who's he gonna go after between those two guys? Because I think it's one of those two, or Jokic, I guess. But
I mean, it could be any of them. Is the thing. I mean, honestly,
yeah, exactly. And I think that's the point I was making. They're kind of the same, right?
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, they're neither one of them you feel good about. So we'll see. But
yeah, this recent stretch maybe also just like puts a real funk in your mouth with what's going on here. And like they could still win the title. They're still going to be the 1 seed, right? Like it is highly unlikely they don't keep the 1 seed in the West, which is an advantage, and like they'll have really good home court. Like they'll get I would pick them against the Timberwolves in round 1, let's say, right? Like I think you would. I mean, you pick them against the Lakers, all things considered too, I think.
what if it ends up being the Warriors?
That's just that's just spicy. I
Sucks
mean, even
for
the
Denver.
even the
suck for
Lakers,
Denver.
but even the Lakers is like spicy. It just
I don't
because
think
like
it is.
but I mean from like a bigness perspective, like the scope is on you when we
Sure.
that's more what I mean. Like I don't think it's
Jared
the same
Vanderbilt
danger, but it's
revenge
like
series. You got that in there.
I mean, you can't tell me LeBron's not gonna do some stuff in that. You know, like it's just like
Oh yeah, it wouldn't be easy, but I still think I would pick Denver. I just don't.
Yeah.
Like, we talked about it with the Wolves. This whole like, can it, or even the Suns, right? Can they get it figured out with 5 games left in the season? The Lakers are going to have to do that. LeBron has barely played with these new guys, so I wouldn't be terrified of the Lakers by any means. But I get what you're saying. It would not be a fun way to have to deal with the first round matchup, considering you might have that ailing version of Murray, right?
yeah, and like I think like the vibe on them right now is just like you're not like in the way that like other teams in the West are like heading in directions you'd feel kind of better about to some degree, and the West feels kind of wide open. This is just like making me raise an eyebrow again. Like I have a future on them as like a title winner, like I do, and like I got it at plus 800. It's good value. It's just like something feels a little wobbly here.
BetMGM now has, despite Kevin Durant's injury, the Suns ahead of the Nuggets for both winning the championship and winning the West.
That's not like even unreasonable is the thing, because I just think the Suns are probably going to be fine as much as it's going to take them maybe like a round to fully integrate everything.
But what's crazy is that's a direct byproduct of this slump that the Nuggets are in.
Yeah.
And it might just be action, right? It might not even be the books feeling a certain way. It's just what people are betting on, right? But like, I feel it's funny to me that in the immediate aftermath of the Durant trade, when people were in a frenzy about the Suns, absolute high of anybody's hopes and dreams because it just was new and cool, Denver was still ahead of them in most books odds. And now just 4 losses in 5 games, all of a sudden it's a nightmare. You mentioned the bubble. You mentioned some of their past history. I want to be careful how I phrase this, Chris, but the last little point we can talk about with Denver, I think, they can absolutely still win the title this season.
Yeah, 100%.
Right? And their identity's not different, which I think you've been pointing out as we've been having this conversation. Like, any of the worries we have, we knew Jamal Murray was coming off an ACL. We knew their defense was suspect on October 1st. This is not like a revelation about their team. Nothing is in March. We're not learning new things about teams. We're just seeing how it plays out. But I do think it's fair to wonder, not if they missed their window, which is a dumb phrase, because if you have great players, your window's always open. Did we think Steph's window was going to be a decade? I don't think so. Now here he is. He won a 4th title, right? So you have Jokic, you have great players around him. Your window's always going to open. Was it their best window around the time of the bubble? Because I just want to remind you and people listening, whatever, of what they had on this roster at previous points of this Jokic era. That bubble season, they have Paul Millsap, who's like the tail end of his prime, and Jeremy Grant in the starting lineup. They have Monte Morris, Will Barton, Michael Porter Jr., Torrey Craig, and Bol Bol off the bench. Bol Bol, who they had for a while and just never really used. He dealt with injuries and stuff too, but they never really touched him. They also had, at the beginning of that season, Malik Beasley and Jared Vanderbilt on their team, who they traded for basically cap relief and a pick that became Zeke Naji. Awful trade. And then 2021, at the deadline, we all know, they get Aaron Gordon. Smart trade, didn't cost them a ton. They had Isaiah Hartenstein, which I think people forget. He was hurt by the time the playoffs roll around, as was everybody. Still have Bol Bol, still have Monte Morris, still have Will Barton, all coming off the bench. Most of those players were healthy come playoff time. I would say both of those rosters would not have been going into the playoffs thinking if Christian Brown can just X, we'll be fine. Those were deep rosters. Those were more balanced offense and defense, I think, rosters. Even like how much would the Nuggets kill to have Torrey Craig right now, who's not even like an awesome, amazing role player, but just a body who's big, who can, make plays, play smart defense. They would kill for that, and they don't even have that. It's weird how this stuff changes when your best players get more expensive and time just kind of goes by. The injuries screwed them, and now they're stuck with the best Jokic season I think they've had, potentially on offense at least, but a bunch of question marks around it because they just didn't get it when they really had the most talent that they could have had.
Yeah, and I think this is a reminder that if you feel like you have a window, and I understand like luxury tax stuff and all of this and like rich people problems, but like just like keep as many of the good players as you can. Like honestly, like whatever you got to do, like patch together depth, give yourself optionality, give yourself like needing to bank on the Bruce Brown thing hitting exactly right when it probably hasn't to the degree they want. Like, like Reggie Jackson's not really making an impact for them.
Both of the guys they got at the deadline / buyout are basically not going to play in the playoffs. Bryant and like, Jackson's already getting DNPs.
So what and like my take on liking his fit just looks like awful. So that's bad. But like what are what are you supposed to do? And it's like your depth is like we've talked about this. Playoff depth can be tricky. You're not always going to touch all that stuff. Like it's just it puts you in the spot where you're just like and you like you're hoping Christian Brown is like ready for this.
They run up against LeBron in that bubble, right? And it just becomes very clear that despite Millsap, Grant, and Torrey Craig being on the team, they're not going to put up a fight against LeBron. So some of it's matchup based. They were healthy that season, and they didn't have Gordon yet, but they had other stuff at that 4 spot. Grant's a great player. And then, you run up against it on the wrong side, and I know I'm making the, argument against my own point here, but I think it's more complicated, right? Like, that happens, and then they had the big move. They made the big move with Gordon, and then right away, Murray gets hurt. And so I don't really know. Like Grant leaves for a bunch more money than anyone else was going to pay him to go to Detroit.
Yeah, you
right.
Could have done it. I don't think you could. That's not on them. That doesn't feel like they could have done anything about that.
It's unreasonable to do that, right? I think the only mistakes that I can really find. I mean, some of it like letting Bol. I threw that in there, like letting Hartenstein go. Some of those stuff, but it's like it's not really a needle mover. I think.
Well, Hartenstein didn't even develop. Like he had like a little run in Cleveland where he developed, then he goes to the Clippers and develops. Now he's like, it's Isaiah Hartenstein, but he like hadn't turned into that guy behind Jokic,
and he gets hurt a lot.
And he gets hurt a lot.
Yeah. I hear you, right? Like I don't think those are the biggest needle movers, but I feel like the two real criticisms that I have of what's fallen out and left them with the roster they have. Giving MPJ a max made no sense, still makes no sense. And trading Beasley and Vanderbilt for basically nothing just to get off of salary. I know Vanderbilt wasn't yet what he is now, but he had the makings of that. The draft nerds have always loved him. He's always been this toolsy athletic player. And Beasley's just a killer shooter that we just saw be a major piece 4 years later. Still at a trade deadline where he just still has that one skill and it is still very valuable. And all they basically get is cap relief and a backup center that they drafted. That one really screwed them. You know how great they'd be if they had Malik Beasley and Jared Vanderbilt in 2023? That we'd be like, okay, they're winning the title. It's over.
Yeah, they had one of them, and you'd feel like just better about it.
Yeah,
just one of them.
Also, those guys I hope they get traded together for the rest of their careers as a package
just like
deal.
a buddy. Yeah. So, Brendon, let me ask you this. We'll end on this. Where would you have them in your West title contention sphere after all of this, after this whole conversation? I would have them second behind Phoenix.
Yeah, I think I'm in the same spot. I don't think it's fair to discount what they've done for multiple seasons, but especially even the beginning of this season, just because they've had a slump here. And I do think with Murray, that is really what I feel that it is a slump. So they're still second, but even then, they have some holes that we knew were always going to be there. And if you get the best version of some of these secondary contenders in the West, like Memphis, Dallas, Golden State, Clippers, let me put it this way. I think the Suns would beat them. I think that I would pick them probably to beat any of the other teams, but I don't think any of those series are going less than 6 games. It's not going to be easy for them to beat a lot of these teams because of the limitations that they have. And then you put yourself at risk of an injury goes the wrong way, a game goes the wrong way, and all of a sudden you did lose.
I think that's perfectly said as an end cap pair. All right, thanks again for listening to the Just Basketball Show. I'm Chris Manning. That's Brendon Kleen. Thanks again to Jake Stevens and Dylan Heiser for production. And look, baseball season's coming up. Go check out the Just Baseball Show if you have not already. They're down covering the WBC in Miami. I mean, it looks like a ton of fun. And again, please subscribe. Give us 5 stars if you haven't already. Subscribe on YouTube. We'll be back later this week with another episode. Got some fun guests planned as well. So, like I said, I'm Chris. That's Brendon. Be well, everybody.